Think of how you were I was trying to think of how like we knew each other in school, but I was trying to think who you were friends with in my year. Was it
Oh,
Alicia?
please. I was friends with Lauren and Vanessa.
Oh, right, but how did you know them?
How did I know them?
Did you go to no, they didn't go to Falk or U school or something?
So I went to First Unitarian Universalist with them.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, we're down the UU way together.
Really?
Yeah, and
Really?
that's how I knew them. So then
A lot of Iranian UUs,
I
huh?
mean, they're all I mean, it's kind of, if we're gonna get into this, I would say it's like the Reform Jew. Very similar in terms of culture is more important than, let's call it,
True. True.
religion.
I hear you on that. I hear you on that. Yeah.
And so those Shias, as opposed to those Sunnis, they have a different perspective on the scene. I'm just saying. I think it's a very,
I've heard a thing or two about the Shias and the Sunnis.
well, they have a very different, it's like somebody being like, but they're both Muslim. And you're like, okay, well, are the Mormons the same as the Presbyterians? Clearly not. I mean, we've got some similar base things, but
Yeah,
outside of
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we'll give I have Michaela here also, who has listened to the podcast and is gonna chime
Oh,
in near the
fun.
end. So
I
we've
gotta
got
find
our,
my little
yeah.
I
So
gotta
do you
find
want to will
my
you
little key.
unshare, Lauren? Will you pause your sharing or whatever? So we go back to big people.
Oh, has it not? It says resume share, so I'm not on a new share. Do you
Go to
stop
like,
share?
yeah,
You want
stop
me to
share.
stop? Okay. How's that?
It's good.
Okay.
It's perfect.
Oh, great. So I'll just know how to do that. It might take me a second, but that's cool because
That's okay.
whatever. No one's perfect on the Zoom.
I just want to say that the judgment I feel should be minimal in an online environment on the
True.
how we behave.
It's
Hi,
true.
Leah. So I'll give it another second just because it's 11 now to like, I think there were going to be a few students who came in to like be in this part, and then other people are on the YouTube situation. And I'll do an intro of Lauren, and then we'll start talking about some fun stuff and being funny. Fun and funny. That's my goal.
I didn't know that that was on the list of things to do today. Is be
Well,
fun and
Lauren,
funny.
I mean,
Not
and
prepared for that.
funnier. Fun is
Although my background is both fun and funny.
okay. What is that? Well, yes, we're going to get into that, right? I'm just doing a brief
Yeah.
intro, though. I'm not going real deep on
You're
the,
not going deep on
I,
like tell
on
me
like,
about tell me about your Boy George album. Tell me about your Culture Club album.
I mean, I want you to do that, clearly.
Tell me about this gay puzzle that you have up here.
There's a gay puzzle.
My
Yeah.
friend sent me a custom puzzle. It was a picture of us all, and then they put like unicorns and all kinds of things in the background. Then when I put it together, then I glued the puzzle together and framed it.
Wow, Lauren, we're gluing together puzzles and framing them. Everybody else is laughing too.
I'm a little bit
Wow. Okay.
every so often I like to
You
craft.
You thought I had a lot of time because of this background. Really, it's you in your crafting corner, like Amy Sedaris. Gonna like jump out there.
Listen, I don't mind. I don't mind.
All right. Well, just because it's a couple minutes after, I want to get us started so we have time to talk
Sure.
about this awesome podcast. So,
Right?
welcome everybody to our very first Research in Real Life lecture. We're very lucky to have Lauren Ober with us. She's right there waving. Um,
Hi.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
So we have some students on here who are all muted who will engage us at the end with some questions, who have been able to listen to the podcast and are excited to kind of have somebody like you who's, Southwestern PA native and
True.
is doing something kind of boss with their life. Talk to us a little bit about, boss. I'm calling it boss. It's like I'm a podcast host. I'm going to live vicariously through you for the next hour and a half.
Fine.
So Lauren's currently the host of Spectacular Failures from American Public Media. She does a lot of other amazing things also. She's a podcast consultant. She's a voice coach. And on her website, she says she's a noted presenter on all things audio. Do you know that it says that about you, Lauren? That's a real jack of all trades. And I'll just point out that in social work, we like to think of ourselves as being jack of all trades. So I kind of love Your stuff
It's
mirrors
totally
that.
embarrassing. I mean, did I even write that? I must have.
No.
Um,
It sounds very you when I read it. It's like your voice was put onto the screen. So I want to give Lauren a big thank you for being a part of this, for going to the Zoom format with us, for connecting with, and Lauren's also connecting with a student class after this, Dr. Fasanik's class, to connect with those students who are working on podcast and other sort of digital storytelling. So this is her like moment to connect with university, and I'm excited for those who are watching on YouTube to kind of get a feel for something that I hope is like an innovative new series that I just hope makes research feel like something we all can see as a part of our careers, and how engaging in depth in story, be it about, mathematics, business, the intersection of business and fun, which is, I believe, what Spectacular Failures is.
Jesus.
I mean, it is. Look, that word fun's gonna keep coming up today, Lauren.
Oh boy.
So I'm gonna I'm gonna turn it over to you to just give us a little bit of, background, and maybe tell us more about you, and then connect into some of the storytelling.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Dr. Block.
Well, they only call me that here. Everywhere else, they just call me Ozzy.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me. I appreciate students for showing up. Look, you guys have, I just got to say this at the outset, you have my deepest empathy, that like you're college students and you're going through this time and you have to do it online, and whatever your expectations were of college, this is not it. And so I fully get that, like, this is, for lack of a better term, like a shitty situation, and you guys are choosing to make the
Bleep.
best of it. And you guys are choosing to make the best of it. And I really appreciate that. And I can't imagine how hard it is. And I keep trying to think about what it would have been like for me when I was going to college, and if this had happened then, and all of the things I was looking forward to, and all the things that I was, all of that. So anyway, all I will say is that this will build your bounce back muscle. This will build your resilience muscle and your grit muscle and all of that stuff. And I mean, I guess if nothing else, it's like all of you are going through this together. All of you are experiencing the same thing together. And there's something to be said for that. So I just wanted to caveat all of this with, like, you have my deepest respect for pushing through like a really, really hard time. So a little bit about me, and I'll try not to, I mean, look, it's going to be like mostly me talking the entire time. So like, who am I kidding here?
Me laughing at appropriate times too,
I would
Lauren.
have loved to do like a full on, like if I was coming to your campus, I would have done like a full on big presentation, and it'd be like my very mediocre PowerPoint abilities. I'm known for my mediocre PowerPoints. I would have loved to share one of those with you, but instead we're just going to do some screen sharing, and I'm going to walk you through sort of what it takes to go from like nothing to a full on produced podcast that is accurate and fun and well received. Anyway, but before I do that, let me just walk you a little bit through my own bio. As Dr. Block said, I am from Southwestern Pennsylvania. I'm from Pittsburgh. We went to school together. We went to high school together, which is how we know each other. My family is from Mount Lebanon. They still live in Mount Lebanon, Scott Township, like Western Pennsylvania. My whole family basically has been there. My brother and I are the only people who, we moved because we're jerks. I love Pittsburgh. I'm obsessed with that part of the world. I'm sad that I don't live there. I live in Washington, D.C., which is where I am right now. I'm in my office at my house. My dog is here. He might wake up, but I drugged him, so he won't. I started off, I went to American University. I graduated very long time ago. I was an athlete in college, which is why I also keep thinking about how it's challenging. Like if somebody told me like your season is done, because of disease, I would be livid and I wouldn't know what to do with myself, because it
Yeah.
felt like my whole life at that time. I left when I graduated from college. I went to work at a boarding school for 2 years in the UK.
Hmm.
I lived in north of England. I taught like I was a lacrosse coach there, which is what my sport was, and I lived in with the kids, and it was a totally bizarre experience, especially coming from Pittsburgh. Like I did not go to a boarding school, and anyway, and but while I was in college, I started writing for the school newspaper, and I thought it was really fun. Like I had never had any experience with that before, and so and it was fun, and people read what I wrote, and I got a kick out of that, right? So when I was trying to figure out, okay, I'm working at this boarding school, what do I do after this? Thought, well, maybe I'll go to graduate school because I like writing. I really had no direction. Like I honestly, I knew very little about like what jobs were out there, even though both my parents were professionals. I just didn't really know much about what was available. And I feel like a lot of people don't when they're in school. Like there are infinity jobs, and you just don't know what's out there. So I applied to graduate school in journalism, and I ended up going to Syracuse University. I made my decision because they had a 1-year program, and it was the cheapest. Like it's
I
not
like
really.
I love that level of honesty here, Lauren, because that's really bringing it.
Well,
Just
no, I
saying.
mean, I mean,
Yeah.
look, like I was very unfamiliar. My parents didn't really understand college debt. I didn't understand college debt, and all I knew was that I didn't want to be saddled with something, like 60, 70, $80,000, which I didn't understand, right? I
I,
didn't understand how
yeah.
much people made in their jobs, and I didn't understand then, how you would pay something like that back. So I went to Syracuse. I got a little bit of a scholarship, and I learned how to do the technical side of journalism and writing. And when I got out, I ended up interning at a newspaper in London for a summer, and then I came back and I found a job at a really small newspaper in upstate New York. It was crazy. I felt like there were like no young people there. I did a lot of reporting on like rural life, which I was not used to growing up in a city. And then I moved to Vermont and worked at a slightly larger paper. And this was at a time when all newspapers were basically collapsing in on themselves because of digital, right? And so, you might have grown up with a family that got the newspaper every day. And there is a very high likelihood that none of you read a paper newspaper. And so I entered newspapers at a time when this transition was happening and people didn't quite know how to navigate it. And it was a very, very hard time. People were getting laid off left and right. But I just kind of kept plugging away at it. I worked at 2 newspapers in Vermont. I stayed there way longer than I anticipated, but sometimes you get in a relationship with somebody and you end up staying in a place longer than you think. And then I left my newspaper job. It just was a very toxic place to work, and I had always been interested in audio. I'd listened to podcasts. I'd started listening to podcasts like This American Life and Freakonomics and Planet Money, these kind of early iterations of things. And then and I was like, well, I don't know how to do that. And I'm like terrible with technology. Like I can't teach myself. It's funny because my mom will call me to ask me to like fix her iPad remotely. And I just like have to Google how to do it. I don't know how to do anything. Like I literally don't know how to do anything. And I don't care to. Like it doesn't interest me. So I didn't think like I'd be able to do the technical side of audio production. And so I found out about this program called the Transom Story Workshop, which was on Cape Cod. And I applied to it and got in, and it was a very small 2-month-long intensive program on how to make audio, which is very niche, or it was at the time. It was quite niche. I went in 2012. It was like $8,000 or $9,000, and I did an early kind of GoFundMe, saying to people, hey, if you've ever read my writing, if you've ever, appreciated any of the work that I've done, maybe you want to kick in a little bit. And I raised like a decent amount, and I found a scholarship through the Vermont Department of Education, and I like cobbled together money to pay for it. It's funny because my cousin got drunk at a family my cousin got drunk at a family wedding and was like, "You're a real asshole." And I was like, "What?" She was like, "Why are you asking people for money for your school?" And I was like, "You could ask for money for your school too if you wanted." Anyway, I funded it. I figured out how to do it. I went there, and then I came out with these skills, and I was like, great. Like, I'm going to work in radio. I'm going to work in public radio. I'm going to work in audio storytelling. But of course, when you have 2 months experience, nobody is interested in hiring you for anything. So I ended up moving back to Washington, D.C., where I went to college, and I got a job writing for a university. And on the side, I would pitch audio stories to NPR, to National Public Radio. And I would make them on my own. And I just sort of slowly started succeeding at that and getting stories in the air. And then finally, I got hired by the NPR station here in Washington, D.C., which is called WAMU. And I got hired part-time. And then I worked there for a while, working on a sort of weekly, we call it like a magazine type show, which is just sort of a bunch of different types of stories all together. And then I ended up, that show ended, the host left, she didn't want to work there anymore. And they talked to me about creating a new show. And I never hosted anything before, but I always kind of had an interest in it. I mean, clearly in our brief period of time here, like you might get the sense to like, I don't mind talking. And so hosting seemed to me like something that I could be good at, something that would be really fun and that would sort of merge all of my interests of like storytelling and journalism and reporting and research and all of that stuff. And also sort of being a personality and engaging with people. And so we started this show called The Big Listen, which we framed it as kind of the broadcast about podcasts, which was a radio show basically about this emerging audio medium. We kind of looked at it as like Oprah's favorite things, plus like the New York Times book review, plus like whatever, like it was just like a mishmash. And we tried it and it worked. It was, we were on stations around the country. We were a national show. Then it was canceled because shows are very expensive. They cost a lot of money to produce and it wasn't bringing in the types of revenue. And so then I kind of had to recalibrate, what I was doing with my life. And I ended up auditioning for the current show that I host called Spectacular Failures. I had never auditioned for anything before, except for like maybe a junior high musical. And I didn't get in because I have a terrible singing voice. So I ended up getting this job over like a couple of like bigger name audio people. And the conceit was, it's a show about business failure, figure it out, and part of my job, I got hired to develop the show. And so that kind of brings us to now-ish times. We started the show in 2018, or I started working on the show in 2018. We launched in 2019 with 10 episodes, and basically they were each, I would say, they're all like half an hour sort of documentaries about big business failures. Kodak, U-Haul, Forever 21, big brand names, and then some smaller stories that aren't brand names, but that are sort of interesting story to tell. I don't know anything about business. I know absolutely nothing. Like, I never took economics. I never took business classes. Like, I don't know anything about it. I don't read the business pages in the newspaper. Like, I can barely even open, like understand like my retirement account. You know what I mean? So I don't really get it. I've never been entrepreneurial, but my feeling about taking on a story like that or taking on a show like that was business stories are just human stories with a lot more money attached, right? And there's always drama in human stories. And so that drama piece of it is interesting. So I ended up hiring a friend of mine who I've worked with before, named Whitney, and he and I developed the show together, developed the sound of the show, created the story list and all of that stuff. And our first season was successful beyond what we ever could have imagined for the show. We at the end of 10 episodes, we had gotten, 2.5 million downloads. It would be considered a hit show. It was on Time Magazine's top 10 podcasts of 2019. It was on all kinds of other lists, Esquire, Financial Times, like no braggies, I'm not like, I'm just saying like, it was a total shock to us, right?
Total braggies, and I loved it. It was good braggies. Totally appropriate braggies.
You can go on our website and see all of our other accolades if you want. There are a lot of them. No, but I mean, it was really surprising to us. And, my team works remotely. Our home base, like our home, it is a show from American Public Media. They're based in Minneapolis. My producer, Whitney, lives in New York City. I live here in Washington. Also, our new producer, David, also lives here in Washington. So we're kind of scattered all over the place. But in Corona times, like now everybody realizes like teams can kind of work together scattered all over the place. So that just kind of is a nickel tour of my own personal bio, which is that like there's just been a lot of hiccups. I mean, I got fired from a job in there. I left a job under duress. Like I've had like a real kind of checkered like work experience. But the one thing that was consistent is that like I love to do the research that gets you to understand a story. Like I'm a deeply curious person. I'm a big reader. I have an interest in lots of different topics. I once heard the journalist Katie Couric say that she was 5 miles wide and 2 feet deep. And and I appreciate that because that's the way I feel about myself. I have an interest in lots of different things, but I'm not an expert in anything, like by any stretch. Like my dad is also this way. My dad's a lawyer, and he, and for every case that he does, he has to become an expert for that period of time. And then you move on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And so you build up this sort of basic understanding of a lot of different things. So I don't have, unlike a lot of your professors that have like a very deep well of knowledge on a very particular topic, I don't have that. I'm a generalist, but that means I'm able to sort of shift gears really quickly. And that serves our show well because our show is an anthology, right? It's like we do a story of a company from the 80s. We'll do a story from another company from like this, 90s or contemporary or whatever. And we sort of bop back and forth. And our ability to do that, I think, is because like we don't get like mired in like all of the details. I think that like my interest in sort of unpacking ideas, I mean, that's a euphemism for research, right? But I feel like research, and I'm sure that's why Ozzy, you're doing this, is because people think of research as like you go to the library, you open some books, you take some notes. It's like real painful for a lot of people because the research, because what you're doing research to write a paper, and sometimes it's a necessary thing, but sometimes it feels artificial, and perhaps you're not following your own curiosity or whatever. But once you get into sort of the working world, you're able a little bit more to follow your own interests and your own curiosity in a way that in a school structure is just a little bit less easy, I think, to do. But I think I always start with like, what am I interested in? What am I curious about? What is weird about this? And who has already researched this, written about it, whatever. So I'm gonna walk you guys through my basically how we go from like 0 ideas to a full story list to to then how do you start each episode? Do we have a question there? Ozzy?
No, it was somebody just being
have a
polite
little-
about that they had to run away for a work thing and they'll be back.
Oh, that's very sweet.
But I
Thank
wanted
you.
to, yes, I love politeness. I wanted to say, Lauren, when you talked about process and product as you prepare yourself to like show us some screens and like share some things, I think that's a really important part of unpacking like what is cool about research is that I think in college we are very oriented towards papers, right? There's a lot of writing that happens, and that's a part of like developing one's intellectual capacity to problem solve and think,
Absolutely.
right? And totally there's like a right. And I know you know that because right, like,
Yeah.
right. But I'd say like for those who are in the midst of it, sometimes you get all those papers, you're like, ugh, and it feels overwhelming because it's not like fun or sexy, if I'm allowed to say that.
Yes, you are allowed to say sexy because I
Okay.
use that word in probably every single one of my episodes.
Oh, sexy. All right.
Yeah, it has
So like a
lot of
paper it is not sexy, but a paper is the reality of like how you process information that you have read and synthesized, right?
totally.
But like in your world of like a podcast, right? There's interviews that are happening, there's documents you're looking through, there's like a
Yes.
whole world of like where that information comes from that I would say is kind of separate from some of these other disciplines that like we have at our university. But I
Absolutely.
but I think what's cool about this is that you're talking about how your background's not in business, but like you're doing this thing that's like related to business, but it's this intersection of media. And I think that's important for students to think about too, because you talked about this like career pathing piece, this
Yeah.
like we prepare ourselves in college for our education kind of, and sometimes that like what's your job after or what's the career look like after is not always so clear. And
Right.
so
Right.
curiosity
Totally.
is an important part of staying engaged on that path, I think, is what I wanted to kind of underscore through this
Yeah,
talk.
yeah, absolutely. And I think if I can bang on as loud as I possibly can about the importance of being a good writer, I will do it for the rest of my life. I've read tons of applications. I have hired many people. I the people who can translate what they have done and who they are in writing form, to me, are like they're always going to stand out. and
Mhm.
and so yes, you are writing papers now, and that feels perhaps artificial for some people, or it feels like unnecessary evil or whatever, but what it allows you to do is synthesize information and put it in a form that people can understand, and you can get your point across. Good writing allows you to be heard. And I
Yeah.
think it's like I cannot emphasize enough how much that matters in every job that you're going to have. The ability to communicate what you are thinking and what you need and who you are is like so critical. um so yeah, I mean, I have the luxury of very much making the choice of what I want to pursue and what my team wants to pursue. So I'm not being assigned anything, but I do have parameters. I think
Mhm.
like creative constraints are really important. And I'll show you that in 1 second. So I'm going to start my screen share if that's okay,
Yes.
Ozzy. And give me a second, guys. This is literally like I've never done a Zoom anything before.
Except for when we did our practice run, other
Except
than then.
when we did our practice run. Okay. So I want to walk you through like from, and I mentioned this before, getting from like having no ideas to a list of ideas to a full on episode. Okay. So this is my show. It's called Spectacular Failures. And this is our final, I say final, but there's going to be an asterisk after that. So this is our final story list. And what we do, I'll just walk you through some of the tabs. Obviously, like, here's the name of the, here's like, we were going to do, um, these are our ideas. I guess these are our ideas. These are like our 15. So we would come up with, so basically what we would do is over the course of, all right, let me just walk back. Sorry I got a little bit of ahead of myself. So let me tell you how during last season, our first season, while we were in the process of that, what we would do is when we would see story ideas that would work for possibly a season 2, we have a Slack that runs, and we would just dump all of our ideas in the Slack. No idea was too dumb or too big or too anything. We would just dump it in there. And at the end of this season last year, we made a spreadsheet of all of our like top of mind ideas, just like, here are ideas, here's what we're thinking about, like, and it's just to guide us for a season 2. So then what we do is we take that list, which had probably 30 ideas on it or something like that, of varying degrees of appeal, I guess, and then we whittled it down to about 15. So here we have like we wanted to do an episode on something environmental. And so we decided to do an episode on Love Canal, which is one of the largest environmental disasters in the US. So then we do a summary of, just so that everybody's on the same page. So I do some of the summaries if they're my ideas. My producers will do the summaries if it's their idea. And this is just a sort of to clarify for your team and for yourself what the idea is. You have to be able to explain. This is like kind of like pitching your ideas to your team, and you have to have a coherent understanding of what that is. So then we note all of these, the cause of the failure. So in the case of Love Canal, it was like neglect, mishandling of chemicals, subterfuge, in that the company lied about things, right? Because what we're looking for, the reason why we pull out like cause of failure is so that we don't have a lot of stories with the same causes of failure, because then they just repeat themselves, right? So we want a variety. So we do the cause of failure, and then let's see what else we have over here. So we do industry. This is chemical, petrochemical. And then we do the era, because we don't want to have every single story be from like the 90s, right? And then we say like name recognition, like how recognizable is this? Because what we've learned from our first season of research, through the research that we've done, we do a lot of like market research, and we do a lot of like, who's listening and what are they interested in. And we've learned that like stories about companies with big brand name recognition do better, because people have, a little confirmation bias. They like to hear about things they already know about, kind of.
Right.
This has medium, right? Where is it? It's in Niagara Falls, New York. So we like to get an interesting mix of geographies going on. And then we have what is my favorite category, the levity to sadness ratio. How funny is it versus how sad is it? And generally we like to make sure that we have a mix. So some stories we have, it's mostly fun and not very sad, or, maybe we'll have, it's a little bit sad, but it's mostly fun. And that just matters because if you've listened to the show, and we'll play a little bit later, it's peppy, it's like breezy, but there's a lot of research that goes into it. So anyway, so we go through that with a bunch of ideas. So we thought, hey, maybe we'll do a story about Broadway, this big Broadway failure. Maybe we'll do a story about this pharmacy that made tons of people sick in New England. Pan Am, the airline company that closed up shop in the 80s or 90s. U.S. Steel, we wanted to come and do a story in Pittsburgh, Ozzy.
I mean, hey, UPMC building now, baby.
Right. We wanted to do healthcare.gov, not the actual healthcare system, but the website rollout. That was a big failure. Napster, which some of you might have used in your early youth, but who knows, maybe you're too young for that. Mike Gawker, which was like a digital media company that kind of went by the wayside. Fashion Cafe was literally a bunch of restaurants owned by models, where it was like Hard Rock Cafe, but for models. But it's like models don't eat hamburgers and hot dogs. They don't eat anything. So why are you doing a restaurant with them? A Major League Baseball player, Curt Schilling, had this video game company called 38 Studios that totally tanked. The dairy industry, Forever 21, taxis in New York. You get the point. Like we're basically like going through. There's like lots of ideas, and then we break them out. Oh, here's some sports stories because we like want to do some sports stuff. Here's some Hollywood and entertainment movies. Anyways, or ideas. So we basically, let's see how many we have on here. We had 21 decently viable ideas. Some of these were maybe not going to work, like female Viagra. Like maybe that works, maybe it doesn't work. I don't know.
Why wouldn't that work, Lauren?
It actually is a huge failure story, and it's very entertaining. But it's very, it gets into a lot of thorny things. raw water, like what is raw water? Like one of my producers put that on there, like I don't know what that is. New Coke, you know, everybody wants us to do an episode on
yes,
New Coke,
we do want New Coke.
Everyone
Coke versus Coca-Cola. It's true.
It's like, who cares?
I care.
All of it's bad.
Market research.
All of it's bad. Okay, so basically this is how we start a season. We have a huge list like this, and we do 10 episodes. So there are 20 ideas on here. We gotta whittle it down. So let's see. I have all these little tabs open, but then I gotta know what they are. Okay, so the way that we whittle this down by talking with each other. We just like, and we vote, right? And we're basically like, what are your top 10? Where are your top 10? Where are your top 10? And then we, hopefully a lot of those are the same. Once we've gotten our 10, I'm going to walk you through just one episode and how we go from 0 with that episode to completion. So this is the beginning. Everything we do is in Google Drive. Every single thing we have folder upon folder upon folder upon folder of documents in our Google Drive. It's nested, very, like, we're just very organized. And I think that if you're doing any kind of research, your personal organizational method is so important to helping you have a clean brain space, right? So we have like, actually, I'll just go back just for funsies, just to show you.
I think that's really great advice, Lauren, that organizational piece is really important, I think, to successfully pulling the stuff into the story in a methodical way, right?
Yes. So we have, here's our tab for all of our raw audio, all of our interviews, all of our archival audio goes here, all of our scripts, and we do multiple script copies. We went to LA and we took a bunch of pictures at the like headquarters of Forever 21. So our pictures go here. We get all of our scripts. We do all of our we get transcripts made for all of our interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that we and it's all done by a machine. And I'll show you that in a second, which is very helpful, but also expensive. But anyway, prep is all of our questions, all of our research questions for our guests. When we have guests and we do interviews, prep is all of that. And then I know I have one more tab here. Oh, and this is research. So that was the tab that I was in before. So this is our very, very, very initial research dump. So my producer put this together. Sometimes we do it in PDF form like this. Sometimes we do it in a list with links. I'm more of a link person because it just takes less time than making PDFs of all of these. But so basically what you see here, and I will pull this up. So for example, this is Forever 21 went bankrupt. So this is, we're doing a story about Forever 21. So we need to get all the information on how the company started and how it ended and everything in between. So this is how it ended, which is a copy of their bankruptcy declaration, which you can get online. We pulled this out because it is very entertaining because there's a whole narrative, like here, I can't highlight that, but called Forever Dreaming, a roadmap to the American dream. And there's this whole narrative in here about like, what is the American dream? Now we're talking about a company, a multi-billion-dollar company that, I'm sorry, I have to use this term, it shit the bed. And it declared bankruptcy. And in its bankruptcy filing on page 2, no less, is a whole thing about, this is a story about the American dream.
Feels a little dissertation-y, like what's going on there?
It is. I mean, meanwhile, like, bankruptcy filings are very specific legal documents, but in here, they took the opportunity to tell the story of this company, and it talks about the family called the Changs here, who and they came from Korea, and they have all these relationships with the Korean community and all this stuff. So anyway, that was an interesting read. So we dumped that in there. And then there are just a bunch of articles here about how they came about, right? Like let's see. That all right, that's just a basic timeline. So we don't need that. But that actually is helpful to sort of set it up for yourself. So these are all of the articles that I've read that I would read to figure out who we're going to talk to, right? Because inside all of these are sources. So I'm trying to think of a good one. Let's see. Oh, and these are all in order. Are they in order? They should be in order. If they're not in order, one of my producers did something wrong.
I kind of love the pictures on all these different articles, because it's yes.
So here's the family, and you get to see what they look like, and you get to see, oh, they were religious and blah, blah, blah. Actually, interesting fun fact. If you look on the bottom of a Forever 21 bag, they have these ubiquitous yellow bags. There's a Bible verse.
Yes.
On the bottom. Yeah. So my producer will go through and highlight for me the bits that he thinks are interesting. I do a lot of my own research, but he was the one who was putting together research on this particular thing. So he goes through and he highlights all of this stuff, and it makes it just emphasizes for me, these are the things that we should probably be paying attention to, right? So once I have all of these documents, I'm trying to think, there's one in here where I want to pull out that, oh, here we go. The high price of fast fashion. So, what we do is we try to find interesting ways into the story. So one thing that Forever 21 was all about, we're not just telling you a Wikipedia entry of the story, right? Because you could find out what happened to Forever 21 by going and reading their Wikipedia. It's they went bankrupt, they were from Korea, the end. But what we try to do is pull in experts and pull in other ideas. So it's how can you complement this story of this brand failing with other people? So we talked to a Pulitzer Prize winning fashion critic who's written about fast fashion, this idea that they go from design to manufacture in 2 to 3 weeks. And what does that mean for workers? What does that mean for consumers? What does that mean for the environment? So we try to pull in these other ideas, these other people to talk about the story. So anyway, so this is just our basic sort of run through. Ozzy, do you have any, as I'm going through, are there any questions that or anything that you'd like me to clarify? I know we have people listening who can't chime in, but is there anything you think?
I might actually go to the YouTube thing just to see if anybody is chiming in. I was thinking about, no, I think what you're doing is you're kind of giving the broader view of the podcast, which is, you can go Wikipedia this and see what happened. But I think there's always more to a story. And that's what a podcast is kind of designed to do, right? Is to look more in depth. And this is the intersection of something like Their American Dream
Yeah.
and the failure, and how those things kind of, in this case specifically, kind of harmoniously destroy, kind of came together to fully destroy this family and their
Right.
scene. And I think, having listened to the podcast, what germinated for me was kind of as a child of an immigrant myself, the nature of kind of keeping things insular
Mm,
and trusting only family to deal with certain things that I
right.
think,
Right.
is maybe not an unfamiliar story to many folks listening right now,
Right.
was a part of their demise, because I think it really didn't have anybody else kind of checking the process here
Right.
in terms of it being a spectacular failure.
Right. Right. So that's a really important thing. I think what you're bringing up for us is like is we had never seen the story told in the particular way that we were thinking about telling it. So I think when you're going through and you're putting together any project, you have to think like um, a lot of things have been done before. As you can see, there are a million articles that have been written about Forever 21. And this is just like a sliver of them, right? People have done YouTube videos on them. People have, like there's just lots of stuff that's been done about this company. But we felt like, how can we do our particular treatment on this story? And if we do our particular treatment, what does that look like? So it looks like figuring out who do we talk to. So I'm going to switch it. Oh, actually, before we do that, I'll show you, we do reporting plans for every single episode that we do. So basically, the reporting plan is like, how does it start and how does it end? And it's basically, what is this like? Well, I tell my producers, I'm like, make it a one pager, but sometimes they make it really long. But it's basically just a summary of the story. And then what are some of the big ideas that we can tease out, right? And this is important. These are important. It's important to clarify what you're doing for yourself, because when you're researching, you have an absolutely enormous amount of material that you could pull from, and it gets really confusing really fast. I'm sure that all of you have written papers where you've over researched, you've done too much work, and you're like, oh my God, how do I fit this all in one paper or all in one research project or whatever it is that you're doing? And so I think that really stopping, once you've sort of research, you've done your preliminary research, stop and be like, what are the ideas that I'm trying to pull out here? What are the ideas that I'm trying to express? And for us, like, we needed to say, all right, why did they fail? They failed because they had, like Ozzy said, they kept it really close to
Yeah.
like it was like they were insular. There was no board of directors. It was mostly their family. They expanded way too quickly. They had a really bad strategy for merchandising and selling their stuff. They didn't move to online quickly enough. They just had these big mall operations. And then new competition came in. And so these were the ideas, all of these together added up to a colossal failure. But we wouldn't have been able to get here and to tease all these out if we hadn't done all of the research and read up on like this problem or that problem, because a lot of times all of these ideas don't show up in one place. And so you have to pull from all of your research, to be able to get to this point. So we've clarified the story, we have teased out the ideas, and then we have a little pre-production outline. Now, I'll tell you that we don't normally do this, but it's very helpful. We were having a very hard time with this particular story because there are a lot of ideas in it. And when you have a lot of ideas, you have to ask yourself, do I include all of them? Are all of them really important? And so before we started reaching out to people, we had a sort of skeletal understanding of what the story was, how we were going to pursue it, and then like what we would do to make that happen. So here we just said, all right, we have a cold open. This is what we call our opening because we just go right into it. We don't introduce ourselves. We just start with a story. So it's called a cold open. If you watch Saturday Night Live or whatever, Saturday Night Live also does a cold open. They just start in with a skit. So we decided, okay, we're going to LA and our cold open is going to be some kind of tape from it. We always try to make it like, we say real people. We want real people in our stories. And so our cold open, the way we start our story will be with real people. And then how do we see part one unfolding? Where do we start the story? I think understanding when you have a big story like this, where you start telling it is really important. Do you start at the very, very, very beginning? Do you start somewhere in the middle and then jump back to the beginning? There are lots of ways sort of narratively that you can handle things like this. Because you don't always have to start at the chronological beginning of something. So we were thinking, all right, well, let's give people an understanding of the Korean American community in Los Angeles that the family that owned Forever 21 eventually became a part of. Like, let's give people a little history lesson. And then, we would unfold to like, who are these people? Tell us about the early days of the company. And as you can see here, these are all just like people we thought, like ideas of like, maybe we'll talk to somebody from the Korean American Coalition. Maybe we'll talk to somebody from the Korean American National Museum. Maybe we'll talk to this woman, Hae-Pin Im, who is a community advocate. We ended up only talking with this woman, Hae-Pin Im. But you just like throw out a bunch of ideas, like who are the possibilities for this? And then we say, okay, we need to talk about this family. Well, who knows about the family? I don't. I mean, I know from my research, but it wasn't my initial reporting. So we're like, all right, we'll talk to this woman from the New York Times, Sapna Maheshwari. She can tell us about this. So we basically go through and we're like, what are the ideas that we need? How do we fit them narratively together? And who do we talk to about those? So then, how do we end part one? How do we start part two? So this basically just gives you a general idea of like our organization. And it might not look organized to you, but this is more just like a dumping ground for us to clarify our ideas.
Well, I think, Lauren, it's actually very similar to what we have students do with writing a paper, right? You're calling it different things, part one, part two. You have all these like, it's the narrative, right? Because in essence, your beginning part is kind of your literature review of sorts, where you're talking about background, giving the backstory, and then moving into the what actually happened. And I mean, if you're talking about traditional research, you'd have your background literature review, and then you'd go into what your methods were for your study, right? Of like whatever scientific process you're looking at. And so you're just really looking at a historical process in terms of telling that story. And I think it's really interesting because it's similar in a lit review. Sometimes you find sources on the, in your search that you can't actually find the source. So it might have been like something that's older, or the link is broken, or whatever it is, and like in essence, you could even look at your blue highlighted things as, right, like you had 3 ideas and one of those came to fruition in terms of presenting that part of that story in terms of the evidence base.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's tons of parallels here that, and I have to think, I'll pause for a second and think like, well, how did I know how to do this? And I've been a working journalist for almost 20 years. So, but before that, Ozzy and I went to school together. So
here comes a reveal.
well, we learned, I think, probably very similar early research methods, and early organizational methods. Now, I don't know if you remember this, Ozzy, but we had to take each idea, each fact that we learn and put it on an index card. And then basically, and the index card would say where the idea came from, who, like, you would put your source on the index card. So you would never, ever, ever plagiarize.
Was this a Mrs. Reeves thing or who
It
was
was.
this?
It was
Okay,
Mrs.
then I
Reeves.
do remember this.
And what you
Confirmed.
would do is you would take all of your facts, and you would put them in, you would write an outline, and then you would put all of your facts on your little cards in the order that they would appear in your outline. And then you would basically have the skeletal structure of your story on a bunch of note cards. And it's just a way of thinking about organization. And I know organization's like so boring. Like, who cares? Like, it's easier to be messy, and it's easier to just be like, what? I'm a free spirit, like, blah. But like, I guarantee you, if you try to write anything longer than like 5 pages, like, your brain just gets jumbled. It's just too much information. And if it's not, and we all are different learners, right? We are all, I mean, some of us are visual, some of us are auditory, right? We all know this. And so, like, you have to figure out an organizational structure that works for you so that your brain is clear and you can put together these pieces, these puzzle pieces, in a coherent way, in a way that fits. Not unlike my puzzle that is behind me that I glued together and hung up. So anyway, so this is just like, it's, again, it's like, you're pre-planning. You cannot ever overdo it with your pre-planning, I think. I mean, you do have to know when to stop your pre-planning, but I think that, like, the more organized you are, the less painful it is later. And I'm all about saving myself pain and hassle, like, no joke. If I just hate being frazzled. So let me share this guy. So once we've kind of got a general outline of things, we have to figure out who we're going to talk to, right? And here was our final list of interviewees that we talked to. So we were like, all right, we got to talk to somebody about consumer behavior, fast fashion, luxury, like the business of clothing. So we found this woman who had written about, I heavily rely on academics for this particular project, because I find that academics have like really niche areas of expertise, like we were talking about before, and it can be very, very helpful. So this one woman has done a lot of work on fast fashion, Ludovica Cesario. We talked to her right before she was about to have a baby. It was amazing. She was like, oh, I'm due tomorrow. I was like, what? Why are you talking to us? Like, and then we talked to a woman from the New York Times who's a business reporter who also had reported quite extensively on the origin story of this particular company. We talked to a woman named Susan Scafidi, who ran the Fashion Law Institute. Like, who even knew that fashion law was a thing? But it is, because in copyright law, fashion comes in a very particular category. And so this woman was like, I'm gonna carve out this niche. Again, it's like she found this really particular area that worked for her. And she was really fun. And we talked about stealing, because Forever 21 stole a lot of clothing designs from a lot of designers and never paid them a penny.
Yeah.
So we talked to her about that. So basically what I'm showing you here is that, like, each one of these, we have a different person talking about a different thing. And it's very valuable to have all these perspectives. Now I'm going to tell you something else we pay a really close attention to, because we're a public facing show, because you listen to us. We think very much about the voices that we're getting in there. And I don't mean the tonal quality of their voice. I'm saying, like, who are they and where do they come from? Particularly, are we talking with women? Are we talking with people of color? Are we talking with people of other marginalized communities? Because in stories like this, it's very, very easy to just rely on, like, the 3 white men who have already talked about this extensively, right? And I think it's really, really important, because there are tons of people with great knowledge who, for one reason or another, are not getting heard. and they are not who we think of as experts. Like we think of white men as being experts. And this is not to like knock, any white dudes. Like we love you, but we also know that in media, when we turn to experts, overwhelmingly the experts are white and male. And I think that's problematic because it signals to people that they're the only ones who know anything about anything. It's not true. So, I mean, this story is amazing because if you look here, it's almost all women. And, two of them are women of color. We have, this guy is a Black man. It was just like, I'm not patting ourselves on the back at all. Don't think for a second that I am. I just think that there's a laziness to research a lot of the times. There's a laziness in media, which is we just dip into the same well over and over and over again. And I think we are missing out on a huge amount of knowledge if we are not working hard to find other interesting people to talk to. Yeah. So that's just my plug, and different perspectives, because I guarantee you that, the women of color we're talking to are going to have a different perspective than the white male academic who's doing it. And that's just life experience, and that's just perspective, So anyway, I'll bang on about that forever, but I think it's a really important part of what we do, particularly because we're very heavily sourced, to make sure that our sourcing represents a variety of people.
Yeah. I think that's really important to talk about, Lauren, to talk about representation. I mean, I think at this university, especially, and maybe me just as a social worker, this is something we're always focused on. And some of the students who are in the Zoom room are from that discipline. So I think, they're familiar with the notion that it's important to have representation in so many ways because it does tell the story differently. I mean, yes. Inevitably. So absolutely. Again, if we're trying to tell a different version of the story that's already out there, right, Lauren, even more so important that those voices be those representing these different, constituencies, be they whatever demographic area, is maybe most relevant to the intersection of who Forever 21 was as well.
Right. One of the people, and we'll hear a little clip later, but one of the people who we talked to was a man who was a Korean immigrant who worked in the garment industry in LA. And this is another thing that public radio historically has been very bad at, because it's an audio medium and they want everyone to be, not to say that they all want them to sound the same. That's not true at all. It's that any voice that requires you to do a little extra work when you're listening historically has, I think, been frowned upon. However, in podcasts, I think because you can toggle back 10 seconds. If you miss something, you can just be like, oh, what did they say? So this fellow that we talked to had a very heavy accent. And, it just means you have to tune your ears a little differently to be able to understand what he's saying. It's not like he's not speaking English. Yeah. He's just speaking accented English, and it just requires a little bit more work. And there's no reason, I think, that listeners shouldn't put that work in, put that effort in, because he has something really valuable to say and really interesting to say.
That's a really good point too, Lauren, because I think you're pointing out that it's your frame. So this show's frame is that we should have those voices being heard, right? And that people should try to, you got to meet everybody where they're at. And if that person's voice is, English that's proficient, that has an accent, well then, and his story is really important to hear, then you need to do a little bit extra work on your end to hear them. And I actually really appreciate that message, because I think, there's a concept about talking American that I think is, gets pushed out a little bit maybe. And I, in an academic environment, I have this thing called tenure, and I feel like I can, in this venue, say, I think it's really important that we, to speak multiple languages. I'm proficient in French, I guess, and I don't really speak Farsi, though I, really wish I did. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge the people who are multilingual like that, you're talking in different alphabets and different, like it, that they could even speak English, which is the most conundrum of all the languages with its weird rules and three there's, there, and there, like it, I mean, come on, support
Totally.
the people.
Right. But it's just, I think it's like just understanding that like there has historically been elitism in media, there are gatekeepers in media, and that those people perhaps are not the best people to be making the decisions about who we hear from and why,
Sure.
And again, like I don't want to make it seem like we're patting ourselves on the back. I just feel like there's a responsible way to do our work, and tell stories. And I'm not saying we're the best at it. We are not. There are people who, there's a lot of debate over whether journalism is, how do you do journalism without dropping into a community that you know nothing about, and trying to tell that story? How do you get a community to tell its own story? I mean, there are lots of layers of this, right? And
Yeah.
it's a conversation that's ongoing. And we try to sort of be on top of that. So anyway, so back to what we're doing here. Let me get you. So we have our story. So we know who we're going to talk to. So we book them. Now, coronavirus meant that I had to build a recording studio in my closet. And I would love to show it to you if it wasn't completely dark in there. But, we had to be really flexible. Like normally I have a studio in Washington, D.C. We have a studio in New York. And we have a studio in L.A. And then we use a bunch of other network studios, or sometimes we hire people to go and record the folks that we need to be interviewed. All of this went out the door in coronavirus times, and we had to connect via Zoom and get people to record themselves on their iPhones. Like we basically had people talk to us on Zoom, but then press their voice memo on their phone and then hold their phone like this as if they were talking, but they would be recording through here in their voice memo. And then they would have to send, I mean, it's like the most laborious process. But anyway, that's just a little technical aside. So we have all of our people. We set up the interviews. Normally we would get them in the studio, but whatever, Corona, we couldn't. So when I'm about to talk to everyone, I or my producers do what we call prep, which is basically just like a list of questions. I'll show it to you. They're super basic. Like, how did you get into the clothing retail world? Now that's just to get people chatting, right? Because a lot of people, I mean, people love to talk about themselves often if you can get them going on a thing that they're interested in. Let's just set up some basics. When were you at Forever 21? This guy was the director of global communications. Where were you, like when were you there? What did you do? What was the vibe of the place when you were there? You want to get them to tell a story. Like this is where the work comes in. This is where like my particular skill set comes in, which is like being able to like pull this information out of people. I look at booking guests and interviewing them as almost like a competition between me and them that they don't know we're having, So like, I'm going to book you. I'm going to interview you. And you don't even know that you don't even know I'm like this competitive, but I am. And then like, I'm going to get you to answer this question, and so you're playing these little games with yourself. Like, how am I going to get them to talk about this? And I try to make our interviews sound a lot like conversations. And
hence the word vibe there, Lauren.
Yeah, exactly.
Vibe.
Like what's the vibe of the place? Like, tell me what the vibe is. And the guy talks about it. And it's like, and so these are just sort of general, this is a roadmap, and I can take detours on this roadmap and it's totally fine. But generally this is the flow that I want to have. And so this just, again, it's all about organizing your mind. There's no way that I could remember to ask all these things. And when you're working in audio, it's really hard because I can't just like call you up on the telephone. Like I need to like set you up and get in a studio and the whole thing. So, we just go through like what were your biggest challenges at Forever 21? Like, what message does the bankruptcy send? Like, has Forever 21 kind of lost its shine? Like, we go through there, and then normally our last question is like, is there anything I forgot? Is there anything I left out? And you give people the opportunity, if you're talking face to face, which I know in a lot of times, like the research that you're doing, you might not be interviewing people, or you might just be, doing, primary sources like books and magazines and all that stuff. But if you are talking to somebody, you always give them the opportunity to say, like, you left something out and this is important. So we always try to do that. Our interviews are like maybe like an hour long. Sometimes they're like an hour and 15. And like I keep it really tight because what you do is you have 8 of these. You have 8, 9, 10 hours worth of tape. It's a lot of recording. So what we do is we put all of our tape in this program called Otter, which is an AI transcription program. I used to have a human do it, and I hate to say that the computer is cheaper and takes less time. And so I hired a robot instead of a human, and I'm sorry for that. This is, I'll just show you just for funsies. This is not the Forever 21 tab. This is actually Blue Apron. Our Forever 21 is in a different program that we don't have access to, but I'll just show you. So a transcript, hopefully it'll pop up. So a transcript pulls up, and it makes it really easy for you anymore to like find stuff like, oh, you like anywhere where there are keywords, you can just hit any one of these and it'll show up. I highlight it. You can, like, I highlight the stuff that I want, that I might want to pull out later. So if you see here, like a lot of this is like stuff I don't need. I don't need to hear her story of how she went to medical school. Like, you know what I mean? You can increase the speed of the playback. So I do normally when I'm listening through, I do it in 2 times speed. So it's super fast, but like, you just get a little, like, tap on it. You might not be able to hear it in here. Probably not for some reason. Anyway,
we have about,
organized.
I wanted to say, Lauren, we have about 20 minutes left, and I wanted to give you a chance to play some audio for everybody too.
Yeah, I'm almost there.
You're almost there. All right, you're on a process.
I'm on a process. I'm just getting to our script.
I love it. No, keep going.
Right. So, let me get to. I want to show you guys what our scripts look like. Oh, this is just my outline, which I never ever type out my specific outline. I always do it in like a notebook. Like, I'll actually show you. This is so dumb. Because I only need the outline for myself because I write all of our episodes. But like, this is my outline for my most recent thing, which really is only like my own shorthand. So your organization doesn't have to be formal. It just has to be for you. Yeah. Anyway, so once I've gotten my outline set, then I'm ready to write. And I know that each one of these takes like 4 to 5 days. Like each one of these scripts takes 4 to 5 days. I will just let you know, Ozzy, you might not know this, but in 10 scripts, I have written 70,000 words.
Wow.
So that means I've written a book length amount in one season.
I hope you're thinking about that for the translation of this to your book.
Yeah,
New York
right.
Times bestseller, Spectacular Failures.
I'm sure.
Season.
So basically, like this is our script. Like, and I just write this. I write it off the outline, basically. I write it off using a combination of the outline and the transcription that I've already highlighted. So really, that's just like, whatever. It's basic. This is what my script looks like. This is not what everybody's script looks like. Whatever. It is, how many pages? It's basically like 30 pages, I want to say. So it's basically like I'm writing like, oh, what is this? Oh, 25. So it's like between 25 and 30 pages every single time. I'm writing that. I want to say almost every 3 weeks. So that's a lot. Okay. Here are all of our like raw audio tracks. We keep all of these together. And then we also use archival audio. So maybe I want to play a little bit of just some of the archival and tell you what that means. We use like news clips.
Yeah.
We use bankruptcy clips. We use like, I don't know, what is this Ariana Grande thing?
That's her complaining about how they used her likeness or whatever
Yeah.
in the thing. Remember the mannequin type
Let's see.
person?
You might not be able to hear this.
I cannot hear it.
You can't. All right, let me see. Let's see if we can still hear this. And if we can't, then that means that I messed something up. So, ooh, let me go to my screen sharing situation here.
Well, if it doesn't work, I can always screen share it from my end too, Lauren. Like go to that link.
Why is it not working now, do you think? Why is our advanced audio? Oh, I think I had to do this, right?
I don't know.
And go back to that. Let's see if that works.
Pulling it up while you do that so that we can.
Oh yeah, that's a bummer. We did this, we really worked this out in advance, Ozzy.
I know we did. We really did, everybody. Hold on, wait, I'm gonna go view all. I'm pulling up your thing. So spectacular failures, Forever 21. Forever 21.
Yeah.
Okay, you want me to play and
yeah, so basically, let me just tell you. So this is the final product. Like we went through a million edits, not a million. We go through about 3 edits, and then I record it, and then my producer mixes it, and then we have a final copy. So basically, like each one of these things takes like a month cumulatively to put together, and it goes from like, you know, we start with our little article search and we end up with this lovely thing, and I'll play, you know, we can play like a couple of minutes.
So if you stop share, or I'm just going to share, actually, it'll stop yours automatically.
Okay.
Okay. Can everybody see my screen now? Yes. Okay. Can you hear it?
A little louder.
Louder.
After settling in Los Angeles, the Korean-born Kim did the immigrant hustle, working all kinds of jobs. He delivered laundry, sold cars. Finally, he landed a gig working in the Korean-American apparel industry, which locals call the jobber market.
It's hard to hear there. I think we could probably.
It's really quiet.
Yeah.
Let me unplug my audio thing and see if it works now. Hold on. I'll try one thing.
It's a little, yeah.
There's one fabric company in Korea. He always export fabric to United States. And he recommended to go to the Java area and get the job in fabric sales force. So
here, that's the guy who I was like, you gotta pay a little bit more attention.
Fabric. Then in 2000, he and his wife started a garment business of their own. They called it Très Bien, and they sold
fashion basic. Can wear anytime and anywhere.
Kim's company sold a bunch of wholesale separates, t-shirts, sweaters, little skirts and such, to clothing boutiques. And all of it was made right there in LA's garment district, where we visited Mr. Kim in Très Bien's showroom.
I always said for my customer, I have a USA background. Made in USA that is a friend.
In the early days of Très Bien, when Kim and his wife were still chasing their American dream, they got an order from a small clothing boutique run by another Korean couple. It was called Forever 21. Kim happily supplied them with clothes until one day,
they cut me out, and over 18 years ago.
They cut you out?
Yeah.
Why?
Because their business system is not a match with mine.
Basically, here's what went down. Kim got a complaint from the warehouse. The sleeves on one of the 3/4 tops he sold them were a 1/4 inch too long. Kim was not down with the critique.
I'm not tailor. I told him I'm not tailor.
And you can guess how that went over.
He told me that he cannot do business if I said like that. So I said, okay, let's just stop the business. So that's it.
Had Kim known that the company he was mouthing off to would grow to become one of the largest fast fashion clothing brands in the world, perhaps he would have fixed that 1/4 inch whoopsies. That little extra bit of sleeve cost him a slice of his American dream.
For 18 years, I could not get any order. I regret.
Did you say you regret?
Yeah, I regret until last year because their order was huge.
A lot of folks from the Korean jobber market made a lot of money off of Forever 21, the teen brand synonymous with $3 camisoles, nonsensical graphic tees, and festival wear for people who will never make it to Coachella. But in the end, maybe it's okay that Kim didn't hitch his wagon to the clothing giant. Forever 21's rise to fast fashion dominance was dizzying. But the brand's unbridled expansion, mom and pop management approach, and weak e-commerce game set it up to fall hard, despite those $4.99 leggings. I'm Lauren Ober, and from American Public Media, this is Spectacular Failures, the show that looks cute, even though failures always trying to jack our style.
We can end it there. So anyway, that's just our opening. And I told you before, like, part of what we're trying to do, we're trying to tell a story of this brand, but how do you tell a story of this brand in an interesting way that hasn't been done? So that guy, Mr. Kim, he had never been, no one had interviewed him before, and he had an interesting story to tell, which was that, like, he used to work for Forever 21, and then he made one mistake and they complained to him, and he was like, well, I don't care, forget you. And then it cost him a huge amount of money because when Forever 21 got big, he was out of money, or he could never reconstitute that relationship. And so he regretted it ever since. That's, I think, and just sort of wrapping up or trying to close out what we've been talking about, I think that for me, research is like, how can I tell the most novel part of this story? How can I tell the most interesting part of this story? How can I chase down the most interesting people who have the best things to say about this? And like, it's like I said, it's competitive, it's like, it's like the information doesn't know that I'm in competition with it, and when I find it, I feel like I'm like, doing like the end zone dance, in football. So yeah, I mean, that's just a little bit of how we go from like nothing to full on product that hundreds of thousands of people listen to and sometimes write mean reviews about on iTunes.
Well, I really appreciate you walking them through that process, Lauren. I think that was really helpful in terms of the connection to the research piece, and I don't know, just bringing like something fun and whimsy to it, and like, again, sharing the audio clip I think is really helpful too. Students, do we have any questions for Lauren about, I know some of you listen to the Forever 21 podcast. Did we have any things to share?
I also know it's a lot of information, so.
I do. Oh, sorry.
Hi.
You can go if you want, AJ. It doesn't matter.
I was just thanking her.
Or it was Joey. Sorry.
Why don't I go AJ, Leah, Joey? How about that? I've created an order. So AJ, go ahead.
All right. I didn't really have any questions about it, but I just wanted to like kind of point out that like through all of like these like processes and edits and stuff like that, I like really appreciated how like fluent everything was. Like I used the word like flowy. Like I said, I didn't have a question, but I thought it was very flowy. You know what I mean? And I listened to like a lot of hours of podcasts over the summer, and that's what would stick out to me the most about it. And I just thought that was like really, really cool because you're doing it differently. Like the ones that I listened to were more of like a conversation type podcast.
Yeah.
And then yours, it seems kind of like a conversation, but it's like so question based. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just thought that was like kind of a cool approach to like see the whole back end of that. When in reality, it didn't seem like an interview. It just seemed like you were just talking and telling a story.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I think that's a real deliberate effort on our part, is like, how do you make a lot of information sound as natural as you possibly can? Because people don't want to be lectured to in an entertainment piece. Like you're going to college, you're lectured to because that's what college is. But maybe when you put on your earphones, you want to listen to something for fun, you don't want to be lectured to. And so we try to make it as sort of as like real talk as possible. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Oh
not
yeah.
sound
sure.
like really canned and fun. So yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, AJ.
Okay, Leah, you get to have your.
Okay, so like going off what AJ said, like a lot of the podcasts I listen to, like I didn't listen to your podcast, but like I listened to a little bit. Like I listen to a lot of true crime, and it's more of it seems like yours is more of a like interview, asking people, like, you know, involving more people, whereas like true crime is more like podcasts are more like you know, telling a story and having a conversation about it. So I think that's really cool. Like it's different. It sounds different. And I think that's really cool. But I also wanted to ask, because I've always found this like really fascinating, like with podcasts, that's like a lot of information. And I mean, it seems like you really have it organized, but like for me, like I wouldn't want to miss anything out. Like, you know, like you have like little notes, but like during your podcast, you're obviously like not going to like read right off of your, you know, computer. So like, I just like want to know like what you do to like help yourself remember. And like, obviously like you do this podcast this week, and then, you know, the next week you got to learn all this new information, and I'm sure that's really tiring, but yeah, I just want to know how you.
So basically it's editing yourself, right? So I think you bring up a good point, and this is true with any kind of research. Is it like you end up with a huge amount of material. So what is important? What is and what I do is I use listeners as a guide. I'm like, if I was a listener, would I care about this? If I was a listener, do I want to know this information?
Yeah.
And like, would I get bored by this? Like, I also use my own judgment. Like, do I, stepping aside as like just a normal person, think this is interesting? And if I don't, then I ditch it, you know?
Yeah.
And if I think it's not moving the story forward, because all of our information is to push our narrative forward. And if the information that you're adding isn't serving that purpose, or doesn't have a reason to be there, then you need to get rid of it. And I think that that's probably true in any paper that you ever write, which is like, is this serving my ultimate goal? Like, what is my ultimate goal? And is this information advancing that goal? And if it's not, then you have to get rid of it. I mean, we call it like kill your babies, right? Because it's like there's stuff in there that you absolutely love. Like, there are sentences that I write that I am in love with. I would marry those sentences if I could. And then I think I'm so clever because I've written them, you know? And then my editor's like, no, this like superfluous, we don't need it. And I'm like heartbroken. Like, how could you get rid of my thing? But it's like, if it's not, like I said, advancing the story, then it needs to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Leah. Thank you for your response, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks.
And I think Joey, did you have a question too?
Dr. Block.
Yeah.
I just really want to just like thank you. It was just like really cool learning like your structure about, you know, how you put together this podcast. And I just like the stories because like I think these are like stories that need to be told. There's the stuff you don't normally hear. I like that Forever 21. I just like stuff like that because you don't normally hear that. And I just like you explaining like how it puts put together. And this is like I don't listen to many podcasts. You know, and you know, this is something that, because I don't even have a chance. I'm so busy, but this is something like it intrigued me as soon as I, you know, found out about this, and I just want to say thank you. So it's
Oh,
really
you're very welcome. Thank you so much. I mean, look, all of this, like everything that I told you, applies to books, to magazine articles, to documentaries, TV, even TV shows. I mean, every kind of media that you consume starts with like the most vast amount of information and gets, whittled down to this thing that is consumable for everyday, for an audience, right? And if it isn't done like that, then nobody would want to listen to it or watch it or consume it, because it'd have no flow to it. So I think even if you don't listen to podcasts, it's like this applies towards anything that you're making, but really, like, I mean, literally any creation starts with an enormous thing and ends up with a much smaller thing. And it's like organizing a process to get there is very important. But yeah, thank you for that.
And I liked your comment about killing the babies or throwing away the babies as a right? You get these like pet pieces of information, because I think anybody who's worked on any kind of like project meaningfully does and I would say this too. I've experienced this with students with drafts, like they'll lose a draft or something. And I totally get that initial feeling of like, oh, I lost my draft, or like my computer froze or whatever. But I honestly think sometimes the second thing they write ends up being better because they didn't have all the babies in there. It was the synthesis, and I think it relates to a very real experience we have of as we go through and synthesize information, and that process of research, we get really attached to that stuff because we worked on it,
Yes.
And I think it's a nice, I like the term. I'm co-opting it.
You can kill your babies. Yeah, it's funny. We also have a piece of equipment in all of our kits called a dead cat. So we have like a lot of weird terms.
A lot of death things there. A lot of, I mean, you don't be sorry. Don't you be sorry. It's everybody's got their process. Spectacular failure. I mean, death is like related to that. I think that's
sure.
Actually, kind of campy and fun.
Yeah, totally.
Well, I want to say thank you to you, Lauren, and thank you to students who have been here and been a part of this. This is all saved on YouTube, so I'll make sure, Lauren, that it gets out to you in terms of the link.
Oh, cool.
And I guess is that all I say? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you all. Also,
thank you.
And good
Very
luck.
Informative.
Truly good luck with school. I mean, it's like such a messed up time, but like you guys are putting the work in, and you deserve to be credited for that. And so I'm grateful that you showed up, and grateful for your questions, and good luck with everything as you're going forward, for sure.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Lauren.
Cool. All right, we'll see you guys.
Bye.
Bye.